I rode through the dry hills of Whitestone under a sky the color of old iron. My horse's hooves kicked up dust that clung to my cloak like regret. I was 29, with calluses on my hands from 10 years of selling my sword in border wars between men and orcs. I had grown tired of the smell of blood and camp smoke. All I wanted now was a piece of land, a roof that didn't leak when it rained, and the chance to wake up each morning without wondering whose blade would find my back before nightfall. The letter from the debt collector had reached me 2 weeks earlier. Whitestone Farm was drowning in debt. The old orc owner had died after 3 years of drought, leaving only his daughter and a mountain of unpaid silver to the Lord's treasury. The collector, Morton Vile, had given the girl a choice: lose the land or marry the man who paid the debt. He had told her the buyer was an old farmer named Rorvik, rich, gray-haired, looking for both land and a young wife to warm his last years. I smiled bitterly at the memory. Morton had never asked my age. The farmhouse appeared around the last bend, a large wooden building with a sagging roof, a half-collapsed barn, and 3 thin horses standing listlessly in the paddock. A woman stood on the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, green-skinned, with long black hair tied back and a crossbow resting against the wall within easy reach. She watched me the way a wolf watches a stranger near her den. I stopped my horse 20 paces away and raised both empty hands. The wind tugged at my cloak. She spoke first, voice low and edged with suspicion. "Where is Master Rorvik?" I met her golden eyes without blinking. "That's me." For a moment she simply stared, as if the words refused to settle in her mind. Then her brows drew together. "You're young." 29, I said, still breathing, "and if you agree I'll stand beside you on this land instead of above you." Her name was Leora Whitestone, 22 winters old, daughter of an orc who had fought the drought until it killed him. She had inherited the house, the failing barn, 3 starving horses, cracked fields, and a debt so heavy it could crush a man's spine. Morton had told her the buyer was an old man who wanted both the farm and the girl who came with it. She had expected gray hair, a bent back, and cold hands that would claim her like another piece of property. Instead, she got me. We stood there in the dusty yard while the truth settled between us. I did not lie to her. I wanted the land, needed it the way a drowning man needs air. But I also needed someone who knew every dry well and flooded furrow, every weak fence post and hidden spring. She had roots here. I had coin and a strong back and 10 years of learning how to build instead of burn. Leora did not trust easily. She listed her conditions like a warrior laying down rules before battle. The big house remained hers. She kept the ledgers. Every coin spent would be written down for her to see. We would sleep in separate rooms. I would not touch her unless she gave permission. Every decision about the land would be discussed first. I agreed to each one without hesitation. She searched my face for the lie she expected to find. She found none. 3 days later, we stood in the Greystone chamber of Greyford's town hall. No flowers, no feast, only a bored priest, a clerk scratching names into a ledger, Morton Vile watching with satisfied eyes, and old Martha, a neighbor woman with sharp wrinkles and kinder hands, standing at Leora's side. The vows were short and flat. When the priest told me to kiss my bride, I leaned in, brushed my lips against hers for no more than a heartbeat, then stepped back. Leora's eyes widened slightly, surprised that I had not taken more. That night I carried my single trunk into the farmhouse. Inside were my clothes, tools for repair, my old sword and bow, and 3 books I had carried through every battlefield. I chose the small room beside the kitchen for myself. When Leora asked if I was certain, I answered, "You said this house is yours. I'm only asking for a corner of it." I cooked supper with what little I found: eggs, potatoes, hard bread, and hot tea. We sat across the rough table like 2 strangers who had been chained together by law and necessity. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the dry fields. After a long silence, she began to speak, not of herself but of the land, which well ran dry first in summer, which field flooded when the spring rains came too hard, which fence always fell first in the wind. I listened. I asked questions. For the first time since I had ridden up that dusty path, I saw something shift behind her guarded, golden eyes. She still did not trust me, not yet, but she had stopped expecting me to be the old monster she had feared. And I, Kaelin Rorvik, knew that if I wanted to keep Whitestone alive, I would have to earn far more than her land. I would have to earn her. The first week passed in a silence that felt almost like truce. I rose before dawn each morning, the way I had learned in the wars when sleep could get you killed. I fixed the old water pump that had seized up years ago, prying rust from its gears until clear water finally spilled into the trough. I patched the sagging fences, hauled away rotted hay, and mucked out the stalls until the barn no longer smelled of decay. Leora kept her distance but never left me unwatched. She fed the scrawny chickens, checked the grain stores, wrote every copper I spent into her ledger with careful, slanted handwriting, and tended the 3 horses that still had ribs you could count. We spoke little. We did not avoid each other either. When our paths crossed at the well or in the yard, we simply nodded and kept working. It felt less like marriage and more like 2 soldiers sharing the same watch. I knew she studied me. I felt her golden eyes on my back when I thought she wasn't looking. She watched whether I reached for the jug of cheap ale in the cupboard. She waited to see if I would bark orders like a lord. She checked if I ever stepped toward her bedroom door at night. I gave her no reason to worry. I drank only water. I asked before I moved anything in the kitchen. I slept in the small room beside the hearth and kept my hands to myself. One afternoon I noticed the gray mare favoring her left foreleg. I knelt in the dust, speaking softly while I lifted the hoof. The mare's ears flicked, but she stayed calm. I cleaned the stone bruise, wrapped it with clean linen, and rubbed her neck until she leaned into my shoulder. When I stood, Leora was leaning against the barn wall, arms crossed, watching. "You speak to horses gentler than you speak to people," she said. "Horses lie less," I answered. She almost smiled, almost. The next day we worked together on the big barn wall. Half the planks had rotted through. I held the new boards while she drove the nails. Her hammer fell in steady, powerful strokes, each one straight and sure. I watched the way her green shoulders moved under her worn tunic and felt something tighten in my chest. "You have a good hand," I told her. "My father taught me," she replied without looking up. "He said I saw straight lines better than any of his hired men." He was right. She paused mid-swing, hammer hovering. For a long moment the only sound was the wind moving through the dry grass. Then she drove the nail home with one final blow. Later, while we rested in the shade of the half-repaired wall, she asked the question I had been waiting for. "How do you know how to fix things?" I wiped sweat from my brow. 10 years as a mercenary. Half the time we weren't fighting. We were building bridges, digging ditches, repairing walls so our own side wouldn't die behind them. Then we'd tear it all down again when the next army came. I looked at my scarred hands. I buried more men than I care to remember. When the wars finally sickened me, I decided I'd rather build than break. She studied me the way she studied the ledgers, slow, careful, searching for lies. "Which side were you on?" "The side that paid, the side that lied, the side that left boys with swords too heavy for their shoulders." I shrugged. When I finally understood what war really was, my hands already had too much blood on them. Leora did not offer empty comfort. She simply said, "So now you want to build instead of destroy?" "Yes." She looked away toward the cracked fields. "My father built this place from nothing. My mother died when I was small. He worked until the drought took him. I could have left. Plenty of orc clans would have taken me. But leaving would mean saying everything they suffered for was worthless." Her voice dropped. "I won't do that." I understood then why she had fought so hard to keep the farm. It wasn't just land. It was the last proof that her parents had lived. That evening, after the barn wall stood straight and solid for the first time in years, Leora stood beside me and said quietly, "Thank you for not making this worse than it had to be." "Basic decency shouldn't need thanks," I replied. "For me it does." She met my eyes. "It's rarer than you think." That night she left her bedroom door ajar instead of bolted shut. I did not go in. I simply placed one of my old books of plays outside her door, something light and full of clever words I thought she might like. In the morning, the book was gone. On the kitchen table waited a mug of hot tea. Strong and sweet, exactly the way I took it. Neither of us spoke of it, but the silence between us had changed. It no longer felt like two strangers forced together by law. It felt, for the first time, like the beginning of something we might choose. 11 days after the wedding, the Caldron brothers came. I was repairing the south fence when I heard the horses. 3 riders crested the low hill, their mounts sleek and well-fed in a way ours never were. I recognized the crest on their cloaks before their faces. Caldron, the family that had circled Whitestone like vultures for years. I set down my hammer and walked back toward the house. Leora was already on the porch, crossbow in her hands, not raised but ready. She stood tall, shoulders squared, the way warriors do when they expect a fight. The lead rider was Marcus Caldron, the eldest. Polished boots, silver at his temples, and a smile that never reached his eyes. Behind him rode Joran, broad and hot-tempered, fingers twitching near his sword. The youngest, Rusk, lounged in the saddle with a lazy grin that made my jaw tighten. Marcus stopped his horse a respectful distance from the porch and swept off his hat. "Mistress Whitestone," he said smoothly. "Or should I say Mistress Rorvik now? News of your hasty marriage traveled fast." Leora's voice was ice. "What do you want?" "We came to offer condolences," Marcus continued. "Your father was a stubborn man. We respected that. But now that the farm has new management, perhaps we can speak like civilized neighbors." Joran chuckled. "Civilized? A orc girl and her bought husband must have been a touching ceremony." Rusk laughed outright. At least she found someone willing to take the debt off her hands, even if he's younger than expected. I stepped up beside Leora, close enough that our shoulders nearly brushed. My hand rested on the hilt of the knife at my belt, not threatening, just present. "You're standing on my wife's land," I said quietly. "Speak with respect or don't speak at all." Marcus's eyes flicked to me, measuring. "Ah, the new master of Whitestone. We heard you paid the debt, generous, but the valley only has so much water. One large holding can thrive, 2 small ones." He shrugged. "Whitestone has always been the weaker link. Dry fields, dying stock. A half-orc girl trying to run it alone." Leora's knuckles whitened on the crossbow. "My father refused to sell. I refuse." Rusk leaned forward in the saddle. "Your father didn't know when to quit. That's why he died so early. Stubbornness can be fatal." Leora took 1 step forward. I caught her wrist gently but firmly before she could raise the weapon. "Not this fight," I murmured, loud enough only for her. I looked back at the brothers. "If you have a real offer, send it through the council in writing. If you came here to threaten a woman who just buried her father, the next conversation will be shorter." Joran's hand dropped to his sword. Rusk's grin sharpened. Marcus raised a placating hand, but his eyes had gone cold. "We'll leave you to your marriage," he said. "But remember this, Rorvik. The valley is changing. Small farms don't last. Sooner or later, everyone sells." They turned their horses and rode away. The dust had barely settled when Leora spoke, voice low and shaking with rage. "Do you think they had anything to do with my father's death?" "I can't prove it," I said. "But men like them don't need to swing the blade themselves. They cut fences, poison wells, spread rumors, squeeze until a man breaks. Your father fought alone. That made him easy to wear down." She stared at the empty road for a long time. Then she turned to me. "This marriage, it stopped being paper the moment they rode up, didn't it?" "Yes," I said. "Now it's a shield. And shields only work if we stand behind it together. From that day, we began turning Whitestone into something that could be defended." I strengthened every door and window. I taught Leora to load and fire the crossbow in the dark, guiding her hands until the weapon became an extension of her arm. We built a hidden lookout on the roof and placed barrels of water around the yard in case of fire. She learned fast, faster than most soldiers I had trained. When she hit the center of the target 3 times in a row at 20 paces, she lowered the bow and looked at me. "I have many reasons not to die," she said simply. That same week, old Martha came by with advice. You two aren't the only ones the cauldrons have squeezed. Talk to the smallholders, the Jensens, Herman the Smith, the Harris couple. They've lost cattle, had fences cut, water rights blocked, strength in numbers. We called the meeting that night in our own kitchen. 7 families crowded around the table. I spoke first. One house standing alone can be broken. Many houses standing together make the strong think twice. Leora stood beside me and told them how her father had died, fighting alone. Her voice never wavered. When she finished, the room was silent. Then one by one they nodded. They agreed to the alliance. Later, after everyone had gone, Leora and I sat on the porch steps under a sky full of stars. The night was cool, crickets sang in the dry grass. "You keep calling it my wife's land," she said quietly, "because it is." She turned her head toward me. "And you? Why are you still here?" I looked at the dark fields that had once seemed like nothing but debt and dust. Now they looked like possibility. "I came because I gave my word," I said. "But every day I stay a little longer because I want to. Because of the land. And because of you." Leora didn't answer right away. She simply shifted until her hand rested on the step beside mine, close enough that our fingers almost touched. Neither of us moved away. The night the barn burned, I woke to the smell of smoke and fear. I bolted upright in the small room beside the kitchen, heart already hammering the way it used to on battlefields. Through the window, I saw orange light dancing against the dark. The big barn, the one we had just finished repairing, was roaring with flames. "Leora!" I shouted, grabbing my boots and sword belt in one motion. She met me in the hallway, hair loose, eyes wide but steady. We ran together into the yard. The heat hit us like a wall. I could already hear the horses screaming. I didn't think. I sprinted through the side door, smoke clawing at my throat, and led the 3 terrified animals out one by one, while Leora threw open the gates. By the time the last mare was safe, half the roof had collapsed in a shower of sparks. We stood side by side, coughing, watching years of her father's work turn to ash. On the ground near the water trough I saw it, dark streaks of oil and multiple sets of fresh boot prints leading away into the night. This was no accident. Leora's hands clenched into fists. "They burned my father's memory," she said, voice raw. I didn't waste time on useless words. I ran to the signal post we had built on the roof and fired the red flare high into the sky. It burst overhead like a wound in the darkness. Within minutes, hooves thundered up the road. The alliance had come. Old Herman the Smith, the Jensen family, the Harris couple, and 4 other small holders arrived, armed with whatever they owned: pitchforks, old swords, crossbows. They took one look at the burning barn and understood. If they stayed silent tonight, their own homes would burn tomorrow. Leora stood among them, green skin lit by firelight. "I'm done being the quiet victim," she told them. "They want war. Then we give them one they can't hide from." Some hesitated. Burning a cauldron barn could bring the Lord's soldiers down on all of us. I stepped forward. "We don't burn their house. We don't kill unless they force us. But we ride to their gate at first light and show them that attacking one of us means facing all of us. No more shadows. No more fear." They agreed. We rode before dawn, 12 of us, grim and silent. The Cauldron estate sat on the richest land in the valley, its stone walls high and arrogant. Marcus was already waiting on the wide front steps, flanked by his brothers and half a dozen armed men. He tried to look surprised. "Rorvik," he called, "to what do we owe this visit?" I stopped my horse 10 paces from the steps. Leora rode at my right shoulder. The rest of the alliance spread out behind us. "The big barn at Whitestone burned last night," I said, my voice carried across the yard. "Oil on the ground, footprints. Your work?" Marcus smiled that cold, polished smile. "An unfortunate accident, I'm sure. Dry hay, careless lantern, save it," I cut in. "From now on, any accident that touches one farm touches every farm in the Alliance. You come for us, you come for all of us." Joran's hand drifted toward his sword. Rusk laughed under his breath. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You have a young wife, Rorvik. Pretty thing, you should be more careful. Accidents can happen to people as well as barns." The words landed like a slap. Something inside me went very still and very cold. I leaned forward in the saddle. "You just threatened my wife in front of 12 witnesses. If a single hair on her head is harmed because of you or your brothers, the entire valley will know exactly whose name to curse. And I will not be the only one coming for you. The yard fell silent, even the horses stopped shifting. Then the words slipped out before I could stop them, raw, unplanned, true. I once lived like a man with nothing left to lose, but now I have her, and I will kill to protect the woman I love. The word love hung in the morning air like a drawn blade. Leora's breath caught beside me. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus until he finally stepped back, the smile gone. They let us leave without drawing steel, but the threat had been answered. On the long ride home, the others fell back to give us space. Leora rode in silence until the cauldron walls disappeared behind the hills. Then she pulled her horse alongside mine. "What you said back there," her voice was quiet. "Was it true?" I met her golden eyes without flinching. "I didn't plan to say it in front of our enemies, but yes, it's true. I love you, Leora. Not because of the paper we signed, not because of the land. I love you because you refuse to kneel to fear. Because you fight for what matters even when the world tries to take everything from you." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she reached across the space between our horses, caught the front of my shirt, and pulled me into a kiss. It was nothing like the cold, dutiful brush of lips at our wedding. This kiss tasted of smoke and salt and fierce, desperate hope. When we broke apart, her forehead rested against mine. That night, we did not sleep in separate rooms. We lay together in the big bed under the slanted roof, her head on my chest, my arm around her shoulders. The house still smelled faintly of distant smoke, but for the first time, it felt like home. "I'm afraid," she whispered into the dark. "So am I answered. "But I'm better at hiding it." She traced the old scar on my forehead with one finger. "You're a good man, Callan. Whatever you were before, you're a good man now." 3 nights later, they came again. This time, they were bolder. They tried to burn the house itself. I woke to the sound of breaking glass and the roar of fire in the storage shed. Leora was already moving, slipping out the back door with her crossbow while I took position at the front window. I fired into the darkness, heard a man curse and fall. The red flare went up once more. Our allies arrived faster this time. The attackers were caught between our crossbows and the arriving horsemen. 2 were killed in the fight. 3 were taken alive. By sunrise, we had confessions written in shaky hands. Marcus Cauldron had paid them silver to finish what the first fire started. The war had stepped out of the shadows at last. And for the first time since I had ridden up that dusty road, I knew without doubt that Whitestone and the woman beside me were worth every risk I had ever taken. The confessions we extracted that night changed everything. With 3 captured men swearing under oath that Marcus Cauldron had paid them to burn us out, the Alliance rode to the Cauldron estate one final time, not as raiders, but as witnesses. We carried no torches, only ledgers, signed statements, and the weight of every small farmer who had suffered in silence for years. Marcus met us on the same wide steps, but this time his smile was brittle. His brothers stood behind him, faces pale. I spoke for all of us. "You have a choice," I said. "Leave the valley by week's end, sell your holdings to a neutral merchant guild, and never return. Or stand before the Lord's council with every witness we have and answer for attempted murder." For a long moment, the only sound was wind moving through the fields. Then Marcus looked at the line of armed farmers behind me, at Leora standing tall at my side, and he broke. 3 days later, the Cauldron banners came down. Their lands were sold. The valley breathed easier for the first time in a generation. We turned our attention to rebuilding. The new barn rose taller and stronger than the old one, its beams thick and straight. We dug deeper wells, reinforced every fence, and planted hardy winter wheat in the northern fields. Neighbors came without being asked. They brought hammers, nails, and laughter that had been missing for too long. Leora moved among them like she had always belonged there, directing work with quiet authority. I watched her and felt something settle deep in my chest. This was no longer just a farm we were saving. It was a home we were choosing. One evening, after the first good rain in years, we sat together on the newly mended porch. The air smelled of wet earth and growing things. Leora leaned against the railing, her shoulder brushing mine. "The day we married," she said softly, I told myself it was only paper. I had no other choice. I know, I answered. She turned to face me fully. But now I choose to stay, not for the debt, not for the land, for you, Callan. I took her hand, calloused and strong from years of work, and pressed it to my chest. Then I choose you too, every single day. From that moment, the word wife stopped feeling like a contract and started sounding like a promise. A year later, Leora told me she was carrying our child. She was afraid at first, afraid she wouldn't know how to be a mother, afraid the world was still too dangerous, afraid our daughter would grow up in a house that had once been set on fire. I built a cradle from the same oak that had framed the new barn. Old Martha came to help when the time came. When our daughter was born, Leora named her Kara, after her own mother. I held the tiny girl in my arms and realized for the first time in my life I had no desire to run from anything. I wanted to stay right here and watch her grow. The Valley Alliance became formal. We met at Whitestone every season to share seed, repair tools, and settle water disputes before they turned bloody. Leora was respected not as the orc girl who was sold in marriage, but as Mistress Whitestone, the woman who had stood against the cauldrons and won. I was trusted because I never used my old soldier's skills to take more than my share. We had turned fear into strength. Years passed the way good years do, slowly, steadily, filled with ordinary miracles. Kara learned to ride before she could read. She learned to shoot a child-sized crossbow and to keep honest ledgers. She grew up knowing her mother had once refused to kneel and her father had chosen to build instead of burn. One quiet afternoon when Kara was 8, Leora and I sat on the same porch steps where we had first begun to trust each other. The fields were green and heavy with harvest. Our daughter was chasing chickens across the yard laughing. Leora leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you remember the day you rode up and I thought you were some old man come to buy me?" I smiled. "I remember you looking like you wanted to put a bolt through my chest." "I had already decided to hate you," she admitted. "I was ready to fight you every day of my life." I turned and kissed her temple. "Lucky for both of us, I was younger than you expected." She laughed softly, the sound warm and familiar. "No. Lucky for both of us, you kept your word. You never tried to own me. You only ever stood beside me." I looked out over the land we had fought for and the home we had built together. The house no longer sagged. The barn stood proud. The fields were alive. And beside me sat the woman who had once believed her life was a price to be paid. The story had begun when a green-skinned girl thought she would be forced to marry an old farmer for the sake of her father's land. She had expected chains disguised as vows. Instead, she got a man who paid the debt and asked nothing except the chance to prove he was different. At first, she kept her door locked. Then she kept the ledgers. Then she kept my heart. We had faced fire, threats, and the shadow of old wars. We had called neighbors together and turned a lonely farm into the heart of a valley that refused to break. Whitestone was no longer a debt or a burden. It was ours, truly ours, because we had chosen it every single day. I pulled Leora closer and whispered against her hair the same words I had spoken on the day I first arrived, only now they carried the weight of years and truth. "That's me, the young man, and I am yours." She smiled, eyes bright with everything we had survived and everything still ahead. "And I am yours," she answered, "not because anyone forced us, but because we chose each other." The wind moved gently through the fields, carrying the sound of our daughter's laughter. The sun was warm on our faces, and in the place where an orc girl had once stood ready to fight the world alone, two people now stood together, partners, lovers, parents, builders of something that would outlast both of us. We had turned a forced marriage into a love that no one could burn down, and that, more than any harvest or any repaired barn, was the real miracle of Whitestone.